Hey guys, in this video I'll be breaking down a few clips of UFC fighter Charles Oliveira speaking in Portuguese about what was going through his mind after he just won the championship belt.
Foi bagulho muito louco. Coração bombando.
In this first clip, he says, "Foi bagulho muito louco. Coração bombando." Now, bagulho is a slang word that can mean weed. If you watch the movie City of God, you'll hear bagulho used a lot in this way. But it can also be used to refer to any kind of object or thing. Literally, anything can be a bagulho. So, foi bagulho muito louco is kind of like saying it was some crazy-ish.
Foi bagulho muito louco.
Then, coração bombando is like heart thumping or heart racing. Notice how he doesn't pronounce the D in bombando. He says bombando.
Coração bombando.
It's really common in certain parts of Brazil to drop that D, especially in the state of Minas Gerais. For example, estou falando, I'm talking, becomes tô falando. Estou fazendo, I'm doing, becomes tô fazendo. It's kind of like in English how some people say talking instead of talking and doing instead of doing.
Lembrei, mano, da minha família. Lembrei dos meus pais.
Then here he says, lembrei, mano, da minha família. Bro, I remember my family. Lembrei dos meus pais. I remember my parents. Mano is like dude or bro, and it's used a lot in São Paulo, where Charles is from. One thing that I want to point out here is how he says lembrei instead of me lembrei. So in standard textbook Portuguese, you're taught that the verb for remember is the reflexive verb lembrar-se. In the spoken language though, there's a tendency to avoid reflexives in a lot of cases. For example, instead of me levantei cedo, I got up early, people usually just say levantei cedo.
Falei, mano, você imagina como que tá no Brasil.
So first he says, falei mano. I said bro. So you might have learned that the verb for to say is dizer. This is the standard way of saying it. But in casual everyday speech, people usually just use the verb falar, which is why Charles says falei. So in other words, falar not only means to speak, but in the spoken language, it can also mean to say. Then he says, se imagina como que tá no Brasil.
Você imagina como que tá no Brasil.
Which in textbook Portuguese would be, você imagina como está no Brasil. You imagine how it is in Brazil. In informal speech, você often gets shortened to se, and está usually gets shortened to tá. And then after interrogative verbs like como, it's really common in conversation to add the phrase é que, literally, is it that? So instead of como está no Brasil, you'd say como é que está no Brasil. In fast-spoken Portuguese though, that é in the é que often disappears, which is why he just says como que tá.
Todo mundo gritando, mano, a favela chorando.
Then he goes, todo mundo gritando, everyone yelling. Notice how he drops the D in gritando.
Todo mundo gritando, mano, a favela chorando.
Mano, a favela chorando. Bro, the favela crying. Same thing with chorando.
Cara, eu lembrei das pessoas que falaram que eu nunca ia chegar, irmão.
Here he says, cara, lembrei das pessoas que falaram que eu nunca ia chegar, irmão. Dude, I remember the people who said I'd never make it, bro. Now, cara is probably the most universal way of saying man, dude, or bro. And then at the end, he also says irmão, brother, which is another really common way for guys who call each other. In Rio, you'll also hear meu irmão, which is just a contraction of meu and irmão, my brother. So he goes, cara, lembrei das pessoas que falaram. Dude, I remember the people who said que eu nunca ia chegar, that I'd never make it. The general meaning of chegar is to arrive, and in this context, it means arrive in the sense of getting into the UFC and succeeding.
Tem gente que falou isso?
Muitas pessoas falaram pro meu pai que eu não ia chegar, que eu não ia chegar.
So here the interviewer Rafinha responds by asking, tem gente que falou isso? There were people who said that?
Tem gente que falou isso?
And then Charles says, muitas pessoas falou pro meu pai que eu não ia chegar, que eu não ia chegar. A lot of people say to my dad that I'd never make it, that I'd never make it.
Muitas pessoas falaram pro meu pai que eu não ia chegar, que eu não ia chegar.
Now, in standard Portuguese, what he should have said was muitas pessoas falaram instead of muitas pessoas falou. But in casual speech, it's super common to hear people using the third person singular conjugation where you normally use the third person plural. For example, instead of saying os caras falam muito, the guys talk a lot, you'll hear os caras falam muito. So he says muitas pessoas falou pro meu pai. A lot of people said to my dad. Pro is just a spoken contraction of para, which is usually pronounced pra, and the definite article u, literally to the. Just like in English where we have contractions that are only used in casual speech like wanna and gonna, in Portuguese you have spoken contractions like pro. It's basically used the same way as ao, which would be more standard Portuguese, except that it's only used in informal language. So Charles says that a lot of people told his dad that he wouldn't make it. Que eu não ia chegar.
Muitas pessoas falaram pro meu pai que eu não ia chegar, que eu não ia chegar.
So as you guys can see, casual spoken Brazilian Portuguese can be really different from the standard form that you learn in textbooks. This is a topic that I'll be delving into more on my channel. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and check out my video with Anderson Silva next.